So we're back at home. We're about to dive into the pictures of the school here. Figured I'd just grab a coffee real quick and we'll get down to work. So this project with the school, I've got a lot of editing to do, but I was pleasantly surprised because I found that when I was getting them all out of the archives, I actually have a lot of raw files from the second shoot I did, which is pretty awesome. So we get to play around with a few raw files. Now I'm not going to go through and edit every single picture. Check out this sweet painting my wife did. It glows in the dark. But anyways, I'm not going to get into full edit of the whole session. There's over 300 pictures, but I want to just dive in. We'll scroll through a few of them. I'll show you a few things with them, kind of give you a walk through the school a little bit, so to speak, and then show you a few edits on what I'm thinking I'm going to do with them, and then show you how I go ahead and upload them to my galleries, a little bit of a workflow behind the scenes. So let's get downstairs to the office and take a look and go from there. Let's go. Don't mind any mess. My office is down in my basement, so it's kind of a man cave, so to speak. And so, duck my head. There we go. And so, the office is a little bit of a mess because we got stuff all over the place, but we'll take a look. Let there be light. Bingo. We're good. So I'm going to flip this around, get some things set up, and I'll see you on the computer in just a minute. Alright, so we're here. We're ready to dive in and look at these pictures a little bit. New mic I got for Christmas for my wife. Super awesome. I'm really loving it. And I'm just getting the screenshot software fired up, and we're going to dive into some pictures. So, as always, I do like to tell you guys, make sure if you have questions or anything like that or want to know more about something after the fact, get a hold of me. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube comments, wherever works. Certainly get a hold of me, and happy to answer any questions you may have about why I'm doing things on the edit side, or questions about what we're looking at, things like that. So let's dive into the computer and we'll go from there. Alright guys, so here we are. We're in Lightroom. I've got a collection set up over here already. This was back in 2014 when I took these pictures, so it's been a couple years. That's the summer I got into Fuji. I just bought the X-T1, and this literally was probably 2 weeks maybe after I took the first pictures with that Fuji system, and I never looked back from there. But that aside, the first ones that we see here were from when I went up early and went to the sale, and I got to poke around a little bit through some of the new part of the school and a lot of the elementary school areas and things like that. And there's a lot of pictures of the little things I kept seeing at the sale that caught my eye. Little things like, Mr. and Mrs. Claus here. But these are the type of things I was up looking for, was some of our old football uniforms. Sadly didn't find my number there. Our old band uniforms, the jackets here, all of this was for sale, so it was kind of cool. Part of me kind of wishes maybe I would have grabbed that, but I don't really need that floating around, so it is what it is. But these early ones were all shot with JPEG. While I was at the sale, I was just using JPEGs, I think probably on the Velvia setting. I wonder if it'll tell me over here. It doesn't, but I know I was shooting JPEGs, auto ISO, and with the 18 to 55 millimeter lens. So this one was one of my favorite shots. This is another hallway. The band room was right down here, and I spent a lot of time there. Science classrooms off to the side, so a computer lab and typing classrooms over on the left side, but they had all kinds of desks pulled out of these rooms and just piled, and it kind of was a neat visual where they lined the hallway as you walk down it, but also kind of a sad moment where you realize, like, these things are all for sale. They're all going to go and be sold, and they really weren't that much. Looking at this sign, looks like they're about $35 a piece, and I suppose a lot of people that do homeschooling or whatever else were taking advantage of some of these things as well. This I thought was interesting. This is me. Name is not spelled correctly, missing a W there, but this was the helmets we would wear, the, I don't know, hats, whatever they're called, when we would march in the marching band. So like I said in the other video, I think maybe not, might have just been thinking about it, but I thought about buying these band uniforms, but we didn't have much of a marching band. We'd only march once or twice a year around Memorial Day, and we didn't get these uniforms until my senior year. And so I only wore these once, and I wasn't all that connected to them, but they're pretty cool looking with the school colors. Nice detailed, looks like an eagle on there holding the shield, you know, kind of standard marching band fare, but really were kind of cool, and a part of me wished I would have done it. So just a lot of really cool visuals, and going through the sale part of this is when I realized that I wanted to try and get back here, and I made those connections to try and get in and, you know, really make a connection, be able to wander through when there wasn't people in here and when a lot of the sale stuff had been cleared out. You know, looking through it, just a lot of things there. But, you know, shots like this, looking down into the elementary school, 5th grade rooms, 4th grade, 3rd grade, these quiet moments were what drew me to this and what made me really want to come back and photograph it. So that's kind of a look at what started this whole thing. Now, I'm going to jump down because these are in opposite order, but as you can see, starting right here with this photo, we get into the raw files, and I've removed all the JPEG copies already, but some of these things, I've got a lot of pictures of just things that were left, including things like this, where this is in the science, chemistry room, biology rooms. I mean, these are frogs they use for dissecting that are still there, sealed in bags. You know, different things like a cow fetus that they'd study in biology, all kinds of things like that. Although anyone else find it gross that they've got a cow fetus next to a jar of apparently shoestring potato sticks? I'm sure it's not what was in there, but some pretty gross stuff. But I'm going to jump down to the bottom here and take a look, because this is where I went back and where I started. I was in the old part of the building, the junior high section where the 7th, 8th grade lockers were. Now this one looks like I've actually edited these ones a little bit, but looking at them, this is one of my favorite rooms because the light was really cool in there. This one hasn't been edited, so let's take a look at that. What I would do, we'll jump over to that develop module and take a peek. To me, I like to keep things simple. Now, for things like this, I'm really enjoying the Mastin Labs presets as a good base point, and that's using the Portra film stock, some Fuji film stocks, excuse me, and then they've got some Ilford black and white settings in here as well. Now, I thought about turning this all into a black and white series because, I mean, it definitely holds up to black and white, adds to that nostalgic feel, but I decided with so much of this having this interesting light, I didn't want to do that. So I'm going to keep it in color and keep that, you know, kind of nostalgic feel by giving it a somewhat of a film-like quality and look. So if we start out here, I'm going to go with Portra 400. It's a good base point to start off with. By hitting that preset, you can see it already kind of changes the look of it. You know, when we look at it, I want to accentuate in this scene this light, how it's nice and golden coming through these windows that are just filthy, and be able to kind of accent some of the things that it's just naturally spilling on. It's kind of cool in this room. They've got a tile checkered floor, but when it's clean, right now it's really dusty and stuff, but in areas where you can see it's kind of clean, they've actually got it in maroon and gold tile, which was the school colors. So really kind of a neat touch, you know, at some point during the history of this school. These settings over here, all hard and all soft, are just going to control highlights and shadows. Sometimes I'll use those to get me where I want, and you can see how it's changing the preview up here. If I click on all soft, you can see it just kind of opens up the shadows and tames those highlights a little bit, gives a little bit more of a flatter image, not as much contrast. All hard, of course, does the opposite, brings punchy highlights to it and kind of brings down those shadows. And then the film grain you can add to it. But for what we're going to do, I want to just look real quick on an edit and walk you through my thought process. So I'm going to start with Portra 400. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the white balance a little bit. It is warm, and I want to keep that and accentuate it. So I'm actually going to warm it up just a touch. Not much, because I don't want it to look, you know, like this, nuclear orange. and I don't want to go blue with it either, but I want it to be just a nice warm glow in there, and we'll do that. Now exposure is all right because I wasn't trying to evenly light this room. I wanted to show everything. I'll bring it up just a tad because the highlights, there's plenty of room there, as you can see by the histogram here. I'm not really clipping any highlights. So I've got a little room for latitude there. Now, the portrait setting does, the Mastin presets, it does drop these highlights quite a bit to help kind of smooth those out and round them out. I leave those alone. I don't play with it too much. And I'm going to leave everything else alone in this panel as well, including a slight desaturated look. And then what I do is, first off, I'm going to jump over to the tone curve. And I showed this before. When you hit the J key on your keyboard, it brings up the warnings here to show your shadow and highlight clipping. And just a real easy little trick, if you want to bring more contrast, just bring that in until you see that blue showing, meaning that that's going pure black. That gives a little extra punchiness to a scene. Now, I normally go for that look, but because these are kind of a nostalgic look, that faded film look is pretty popular, and this is how you achieve that. Now, you can go overboard and really fade this thing out. I'm not a fan of that. But what I do sometimes like to do is just bring it up just a little bit. And then I'll do the same on the highlights on this end, which will just tame those a little bit so they roll off nicely. Now, a lot of people will leave it right there. To me, this image is a little flat. So by grabbing another point here in the dark areas, it's not the blacks, but it's in the darks. If you pull that down a little bit, it's going to still bring back some of that contrast, but leave a little bit of that faded look, especially when you look into the black areas. Not a lot, but just a little. And then I'll grab a point here in the light areas and bring that up. And you can see if I go drastically, it really brings a ton of contrast. I don't like that. That's a little too much. But bringing it up just a little bit and move it over a little closer to that highest highlight point brings things up. Now, if the image starts to feel too dark at this point, all you have to do is just click again in the middle of this tone curve here and bring that up just a tad, because that's your midtones. It's going to bring everything up. Now you can see right here, they're not clipping, but they're looking pretty bright, and that's okay because I'm going to leave that in this image. But if you run into trouble there, just adjust it right here with that middle one, bring it back down, and that's going to bring things into play where you want them. And actually, I kind of like this one a little bit down. Just kind of accentuates the darker areas. So on something like this, the other thing that I will do lately, it's work with split toning a little bit. And I don't want to go crazy with it where, some people will take this and they really make these crazy looks, super, super blue and in the shadows and things like that. But I find I do like how it gives a little bit of a cinematic kind of movie feel to it by adjusting some of these. So a lot of times in the shadows, especially when you got these really warm highlights, I'll go into a shadow area and I'll find a nice mid-tone blue. Now you've got some blues here, and you can use that, and that's okay, but I don't want it to match that exactly. So I'll just kind of find a little bit of a kind of slightly warmer blue, and then we're going to bring up the saturation just enough. And you can see how even doing it that little bit over in this area, if you watch, you'll see how that wall will eliminate some of the greenish color and bring in some of the blues. Now, I don't want to go quite real far like this, like I said. I mean, some people will do that and it's a stylized look. It's not my taste. This is, again, one of those areas where there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's really just a season to your own personal taste. I'm going to leave it about right here. On the highlights, now, I could go with just a straight orange, which doing that really just makes that super orange. Sometimes what I like to do, though, is give a little bit of like a purplish, pinkish tint to it, to give it that extra little punch. And by doing that, you can see here it turns things real red if you go up too high. But adding just a little bit to the highlights, maybe around a setting of 10 in this case, gives kind of just a neat little warmth and classic feel to it. Well, now these were some other rooms where I had some really cool lighting coming in. This was the actual kitchen, where they'd prepare the food. There's a cold locker over here. This end goes off, just some storage, and then around the corner and out, that's where they'd wash everything, but the big stoves, and really some kind of neat lighting. Of course, window highlights blew out completely, but if we look at it, take a real similar approach. You can see the red is there where it's blowing out. I'm going to turn those off for now, but if we go back again with a Portra 400, and this time if we go with an all soft, you can see it levels that out, but it helps a little bit in the highlights, but it helps retain some detail here. I'm going to go ahead and hit the medium format grain and jump over. At this point, I'm happy. You know, that's what's cool about these Mastin presets is they work really well to get you right in the ballpark of where you want to be. Good, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to just touch up a little bit of this split toning. So we'll find kind of that medium, kind of warmer blue that we were looking at. And we'll see how it changes the look of that, makes it colder feeling if you really ramp it up. I don't want to go that high. I'm going to leave this one around 20, but this one I am going to go ahead and I'm going to leave this more of a reddish highlight because the window light coming through doesn't have as much of a golden glow to it. So I'm going to leave this more of a reddish orange, bring in a little saturation. You see how it warms that scene right up? That gets a little too much. It's hot like in a kitchen, right? A little crazy, but warm that up just a touch. Now, the other thing to know with the split toning tools, you can adjust the balance between these colors on if you want more emphasis put on the highlights like this or more emphasis put on the shadows. In a case like this, because highlights are going to predominantly flow through this scene because of all this window light, you can go a little warmer and bump that up so it leans a little more to the highlights. But what that lets you do then is take a little more in the shadows and bump that up. And actually that's a little too much, so I'm going to back that off. I'm going to back this back off as well because I don't want to make something that looks weird. You know, I want it to look kind of normal to the eye, like you would see through these dirty old windows that have been there. You know, especially when you've got all the grit and stuff falling apart up here, ceiling coming down, but you still have that nice clean stainless steel that's sitting out there, even a towel and a dustpan, like they've been working on cleaning it up. So that's about all I would do to this. Last thing I'll give you, this is a Selfie Extreme. I found this card in the school, so we'll leave on that image. I should have bought that, but anyways, that is it for the editing process. So you guys take care. I hope you've enjoyed this little look back on the Cook School and this little trip down memory lane for me, as well as getting to see a little bit about how I'd approach editing something like this. Ask away. Certainly love to answer any questions, and we'll turn them into videos going forward. But with that, Screensaver says we're done. You guys take care. Have a great afternoon, and I will talk to you tomorrow.